Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for another edition of the YUNOREVIEW, where I go over a series of records that I have not had a chance to review formally, so I review them briefly in a gauntlet style of mini reviews. You know what it is at this point because I've explained it to you, and hopefully you've seen me do it before. Cool? Cool. Let's go. Let's do it. Without any further ado, ba-bam! Kamasi Washington, Terrace Martin, Robert Glasper, and Ninth Wonder. Oh my god, this list of names all convening onto this short little supergroup record, which is a wonderful fusion of hip-hop and jazz and soul. Yeah, it's more like an EP than it is an album, and it's not that versatile, not a whole lot of sonic and stylistic diversity across the whole thing, but still, I mean, the tracks that hit, and like, what, you should be stumbling over yourself to get a chance to listen to these names come together and collaborate for this many tracks, so give it a listen. I've never been a fan of Protest the Hero in the past, but I especially cannot with this new record. This sounds like the worst elements of Muse and Coheed and Cambria and My Chemical Romance all distilled onto one very annoying album that I cannot even sit through a few tracks of at a time, honestly. I can't. This new album from Kehlani, I've been getting a lot of requests and questions about it, and I think it's okay. It's somewhat moody and spacey and very cleanly produced, but in some respects almost too cleanly produced because the vocals are so dolled up and so heavily treated, and the singing and the vocal lines just come off as so average to me. To pop out in this style, like, you've really got to be killing it vocally, and Kehlani just comes off sleepy most of the time, in my view. Not a whole lot of, I guess, potent emotion across this record, in my view. Liked one of the lead-up tracks to this new album and was hoping it would be great, but honestly, the more I listen to it, the more unimpressed I am with the sound and production of this record. And if you're making very long-winded, multi-phased, doomy metal tracks like these that are supposed to be just a meditative sonic experience, like, the sound has to be top-notch. The sound has to be next level. The guitars can't be sounding as muddy as they do on some of the passages here. The mixes can't be sounding as flabby as they are on some of the passages here. This album, this collaboration is well intended. Certainly, there is no doubt about that, but when you compare the sonic quality of this to, like, Bell Witch's last record, for me anyway, it's like night and day. This new Amnesia Scanner record was a bit of a head-scratcher for me. There are some good vocal features on this, and some pretty left-field, wild, out-there, abrasive, and zany production ideas, but a lot of the tracks on this thing are short of breath. The record itself is just 30 minutes or so. It's kind of scant. There's not a whole lot to it, and when I do hear an idea off of it that I like or just feels relatively impressive, it's like a flash in the pan. It just sort of pops up and then it's gone after a while, and it doesn't really develop all that much from the point at which it actually grabs my attention. So, I don't know, some ear-grabbing ideas here and there, but not a whole lot else. But if you're looking for some very strange and experimental, deconstructed in a way, electronic music that takes some risks, but I guess doesn't make you invest too much in it, give it a try. New Lamb of God record. I have never been a huge fan of Lamb of God, although I've never really disliked them either. Their sound for me has always been very standard for modern, commercial, cleanly produced metalcore that has at least a touch of drama to it, you know, a little dynamics. And that certainly rings true for this new LP over here. I would say Lamb of God is just kind of sticking to their trademark sound on this one, and I don't know, which for me doesn't mean all that much because that's never really blown me away, but they're a solid metalcore band. Always have been, always most likely will be, and this record is also a show of that. This short but feature-heavy new record from IDK is a soundtrack, but also a sequel to, that IDK and Friends project he dropped a while back. And it's got a lot of bangers on it. A lot of quality features. I would actually say I like it a bit more than his previous project full of crossovers with other artists that he has a lot of admiration for. There are some pretty well-written songs here. There are some great performances and appearances. There's a lot of energy to this one too. Not every feature is amazing, and being the project or the type of project that it is, it's really just kind of like an assembly of tracks that are either hit or miss, but still, I think this does feature some of IDK's best material to date. Brand new album from Julianna Barwick, where stylistically she essentially sticks to her guns. Lots of heavenly vocal layers, very new agey, very pretty, very ambient, very wondrous, kind of mystical, really puts you in a state, transports you to a place. A couple of interesting vocal features along the way in the track list, but typically what she does as well as she usually does it. For me personally, it's not very high impact, but if you're looking for something that's a bit of mood music and might put you in a more positive frame of mind, or even transport you to a wonderful, pleasant serenity dimension, then give this a listen. New mixtape from Grizzley. Previously, I've not been a huge fan of this guy's work, but I think this project over here is his best so far. He sounds relatively good on a lot of this Bay Area friendly production. I think it plays pretty well to his rambly, somewhat off tempo flow, and it sounds like he's starting to gravitate away from a lot of the commercial stuff he was trying out on his previous couple of records. And the lyrics, the bars that he delivers on this thing are some of the most outlandish and funny that I've heard all year. A few topical and conceptual tracks as well that I think are pretty cool. He just kind of paints himself into a corner with his flow, with his lyricism, with the instrumentals. If he were to come through with a project again that had as much heart as this one does, I would hope for more variety across the track list, but still, again, I stand by the statement. I think this is his best work so far. New Scrim project. I get the excitement and the appeal of wanting to hear him outside of the context of Suicide Boys and everything, and certainly that does lead him down a few lanes where it seems like, okay, he's doing some slightly more melodic stuff and trying out some ideas that that would most likely only be tried out in a solo context, but I'm still not really feeling it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not hearing a lot here that would be cause for Scrim to continue dropping more and more solo material, because unless he really starts hammering out some of the kinks and getting better at some of what he is attempting here, ultimately he's going to be dropping his best music with Suicide Boys and should most likely continue doing that. But if he gets more ambitious and continues to take risks and improve upon his songwriting game, then I could see a solo career going forward, but unless that happens, New Pyrrhon album. This band's combination of technical death metal and avant-garde metal, progressive metal, and noisecore has always been relatively interesting to me, though difficult to digest. Their previous records to me have always felt like being swarmed by a bunch of locusts or something. Just no matter how fast you run or how far you go, it's like bugs are just attacking you and just surrounding you in all directions. This new one over here feels like it's got a bit more breathing room to it, and they're leaning a bit more on the noisecore influences than they are the tech death stuff, which I think makes it slightly more appealing and makes it a bit groovier and gives it a bit more versatility and variety across a lot of the songs. But still, stylistically and conceptually, I don't think it's the most inventive thing I've ever heard. But again, I stand by this statement. I think it's their best record to date, and I think it's worth checking out if you have not heard of the band yet. Jehnny Beth of Savage's fame has come through with her full-length solo debut, and it's a pretty interesting combination of art pop and industrial stuff, and I would say art rock and experimental rock. It's just not really all that consistent, though. You know, there are some tracks that hit, and when they do hit, they're usually in a wildly different style than another track that might sound pretty great on the album. There are other excursions and experiments that just don't really pan out all that far, in my opinion. I feel like if I were to listen to more of her solo material in the future, I would hope for more stylistic focus, because this album to me just really sounds like she's trying to find her sound and just trying out and seeing what works and what doesn't. And certainly she has struck gold on some of the tracks here, but not every one, and that's the main issue, really. Newest record from rock outfit Remo Drive, and I think the band's sound is maturing in an interesting way. The punk spirit and exuberance of their debut record is really just totally gone at this point, but that hasn't been replaced with anything in my view. The musicianship and the performances haven't gotten a whole lot better, and the songwriting quality isn't really night and day either, and all that I'm really left with is a bunch of, I don't know, semi-enthusiastic rock music that doesn't really have all that much bite or bump, which is also slightly emo-tinged, I guess. It's just been really disheartening to hear the band fall into such a so-so middling and uninteresting sound over the years. Oof. Outside of a few surprising or interesting concept tracks on this new Havok LP, this album is pretty much par the course for the band. Very typical, straightforward, vintage thrash metal, which they're not really doing anything all that interesting with sonically or compositionally at this point. Again, the band has an interesting way of approaching some societal ills and politically charged topics on a track here and there, but even when that's at its best, it's still hard at this point to look past the blatant, unwavering, and totally unchanging classic thrash revivalism that just gets more and more derivative with each new Havok project. New EP from Animal Collective, and yeah, it's 4 tracks, but do not be misled. It's still 35 minutes, so you know, a bit of a long one. And I think it's kind of hit or miss, but still presents some somewhat interesting and exciting ideas that maybe Animal Collective could employ going forward. There are a couple of tracks here that seem to go back to the band's somewhat ambient and more organic and experimental roots that I don't think pan out to be the best ones here, but I'm glad that they are changing it up a bit and getting more experimental. Then there are some cuts that are a bit catchier, a bit poppier, a bit more psychedelic, a bit more colorful, and while those aren't reinventing the wheel either, it seems like maybe it could be a way forward for Animal Collective if they were to go back to something more abstract, I suppose, and builds up more tension while simultaneously trying to deliver the listener something that's a kind of an earworm. Look, I think Anco's sound has been in need of a revamp, a change, a something for a while, and while this EP is not perfect, it at least hints to me like, okay, we're, you know, switching course a little bit. We're not going to do Centipede Hurts all over again or any of that other stuff. We're going to just take a bit of a risk, get a bit more out there, and hopefully something interesting on a new record in the future comes as a result. Fingers crossed. You know, it's disheartening to hear Westside Gunn seemingly getting better with a new project that I thought was one of his best so far, and then he'll come through with something like this that he's obviously not trying as much on. There is straight filler on this project, there are blatantly unnecessary repetitive features, there are tracks where it's just like a single basic verse and then an instrumental loop and it just dips. What is the point of a project like this other than to just gather more streams while Westside and Griselda are still hot? Because this is obviously not one of the better projects Griselda has dropped as of late. It's not trying to be. There are only a few great tracks on it, and it doesn't progress Westside or Griselda's sound in any significant way. I've been getting so many requests and questions about reviewing this SahBabii record, and I don't get it. I mean, the cover is cool, for sure. Cover is fire. But vocally and stylistically, the dude is just a Thugger clone. And not only that, but he doesn't even come through with half of the vocal versatility or talent. In fact, most of what I'm hearing here reminds me of Gunna's Drip or Drown, but a little bit better. The production is more watery and immersive and trippier. Vocally, I think it's a bit more versatile, but it's not so great. It's not so much of an improvement. I would actually start listening to it casually. Like it's only markedly better. Some of you may totally hate that assessment. I can hear you typing now, and if you do, that's fine, I'm sorry. New LP from Sweden's own Little Dragon, and it's okay. While the vocals are quite nice part of the time, this is not the radical change of pace I feel like the band's sound has been in desperate need of for a while now. And while this isn't my least favorite record from Little Dragon so far, it's like their sound has grown so much less colorful, fun, groovy, and charismatic over the years, with this project being yet another example of that. DOGLEG, rock band. Mix of punk and post-hardcore and emo. I think there's some pretty ferocious and fun performances on this record. The band's got a lot of heart. They got a lot of guts. They just don't really have the most distinct sound. Certainly not a sound I would easily pick out of a lineup anyway. But I think if they continue and forge something a bit more distinct into the future, could stick with me a bit more, for sure. But if you're looking for something along those stylistic lines that is played in a somewhat gutsy way, give this record a listen. WILEY, Godfather 3, grime artist. Since I enjoyed Godfather, the original one, so much, I've been getting a lot of questions about this latest installment in the series over here. Hoping this is the final one, obviously. Godfather 1, great grime LP, a lot of bangers, no BS. Godfather 2, a lot shorter, a lot more commercial, a lot less enjoyable, a bit more of a mess. Don't know why this one came out. Godfather 3, though, I think is somewhat more admirable. It's more built out. There are tracks that go harder on this one, but what makes this record a bit of a flop for me is that it seems like WILEY doesn't really care all that much on this one. He's just going insane on some of these tracks and has guests that are going insane on some of these tracks, and it's like they have no care in the world about how any of it ends up sounding after they hit record. Some extreme risk-taking on this project, I'll say, with some wild vocal performances and instrumentals. I guess if you want to hear WILEY really let loose and just no holds barred, no rules, no boundaries, and just really make himself sound totally nuts on these tracks, go for it. Go for it. I say go for it. But after all this Godfather stuff, I'm hoping that he reconvenes on something that's just a bit more sensible. New Jess Williamson album, a record that I was enjoying a lot of the teasers from and admittedly wasn't as enthused by when I heard the entire LP. There are some really cool outliers on this album. There are some tracks where I think there is quite a bit of drama, especially where her vocals are spotlit in a really beautiful way. But for the most part, this album is a very standard Americana record with standard Americana instrumentation and singing. It's a little disheartening to hear that the rest of the LP is so, but the best moments do offer some bright spots to hope for something that's a bit more exciting consistently and emotionally captivating in the future. Zishin, have you given any of these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, YUNOREVIEW, forever.